Good morning, everyone, and thank you. Thank you, Tricia and team, for having us here today and giving us a chance just to share some views on this subject. Just, I guess, 4 points that I want to sort of try and bring out during the next few minutes. First of all, this term, license to operate. First of all, people have different interpretations of that. But as is, one of the things for us is retaining the license to operate is an absolute commercial imperative. It is costing a lot of money to actually retain the license to operate, and I'll come back to that with some examples. Secondly, that you cannot be passive. Being passive about retaining your license to operate basically means you are likely to lose it. And I think Kerry's presentation starts to show just how much energy the industry has had to put into that. No one is immune. Sitting back thinking it's not us. You can't afford to be passive. Third point is it's wider than just comms. Communications is hugely important, and having a voice and an effective voice is hugely important. But the communications have to be in entirely consistent alignment with what you are doing within your own business and how you manage your own business. And I'll come back to that on some of the details later. And finally, I think also a point that Kerry brought through loud and clear is there may be some short-term wins. But this is a long-term game. Retaining your license to operate is not an initiative of the moment. It is something which becomes a continuum of how you have to operate. So I wanted to leave those 4 messages with you, and I'll revisit them as I come through and perhaps also slightly demystify this term license to operate, because as I say, it means different things to different people. This is quite a bright slide for early in the morning, actually. I don't quite know what happened to the colours as it went across. But there, what I'm really going to talk about, just on the 3 points, is really this context, this networks of dependency, and I'll explain why we talk about that in the context of license to operate. Examples, license to operate, and examples that we have seen, and I'm deliberately not talking about the whole media and entertainment type sector, because Kerry's amply covered that better than I could. But also then what it means to you in terms of operating in that networked world. And I put there a strap line at the bottom. Working alone is strong, but working together is powerful. And that's something that we've spoken about with the Trade Association, with Tricia and her team. But also I've worked with the trade associations in mining, with trade associations across financial services, both the British Bankers Association and the ABI. And the power of using the association and this convening of ideas and voices is extremely important. And I think it's something that certainly we're seeing with Oil and Gas UK is a huge amount of work's going on, and that is something that you can all benefit from as long as obviously the contribution from yourselves. This is something I'm going to put part of the build on straight away, but in terms of the networks, so let me just talk about this networks for a moment. What we're basically saying here is every organisation is a part of a connected network. Every part of a network, including the middle, your employees, but also those outside circles, determine your success. If they do not agree with what you are doing, you will have difficulty and it will cost you money. And the 3 examples I'm going to come to after this slide will hope bring that to life. Previously, what we have seen with all of our clients is actually the major relationship is with investors and shareholders. That's where this dialogue has been. As long as they are happy, actually the world's been okay. There's been a lot of philanthropy around, and that's done some good, but that was sort of discretionary. What we're seeing now is these other parties, the supply partners, the governments, and indeed the communities, have a very significant voice. And the important thing is that those networks talk. And I think a phrase that Tricia will use and that you've used through your programme is engaged publics. And engaged publics are really in all of those groups. There are people who will create voices, create noise, and influence investors, influence supply partners. And indeed, what you saw, I think, with what triggered this programme for this industry around the tax hikes that you saw, is indeed government saying, we want a greater share. And it costs you a lot of money. So these networks work together, and together they will determine your commercial success. And let me just give you some examples of some other sectors in terms of where those sectors are really now threatened by license to operate. So potentially you could argue that this hasn't yet the world that you guys are in the sector offshore. I think it's, however, something that some of these industries might have said that wouldn't happen to us a few years ago. So let's look first at the mining sector and some of the dilemmas that we see here. And these are real life examples. Some of them you feel that they resonate a bit more with you than others. But in here, the contribution to governments and communities is a very big challenge for a large part of the mining sector. So some of our clients are seeing around the world that they're getting actual requirements, not through tax, in addition to tax, mandated payments for social payments, housing, hospitals, long-term care of the elderly, pension arrangements, actually education of the next generation, not just apprentices, but actually the 5 and 10-year-olds that are going through school. Because the government doesn't have finances, the mining companies are being asked and required through their licenses as a condition of permit to operate to actually pay those costs, in addition to the taxes that go through the normal tax regimes, in addition to the philanthropy and community payments that they were already making on a voluntary basis. The question is, as one of our clients faced and another few are facing now, is when do you stop doing the philanthropy? How much is enough when you're paying out all these other costs in addition? And what this is affecting in a tough commodity price environment, that squeeze on their margins is meaning that their operating costs are increasing dramatically and their return on investment is falling. What a surprise then that the investors are disappointed that they are not delivering what they said they would deliver in terms of financial return and dividend. And that cost goes right back to every single mine site that they're operating, every single greenfield that they're exploring. That is a very real dilemma. But without it, one of the mine sites now we've got has got major strikes just starting from employees because they are also the local communities, they are also the engaged publics. Those strikes are shutting down operations every day and money is being lost. I don't have the answer, but that is not a subject that they can deal with alone. That is something which they really have to understand their rationale, understand their business model and explain it. Retail. A couple of the examples that's really threatened license to operate that we've all seen through the media. It's very much, let's go for example, the horse meat scandal. That's had a major effect on Tesco's and others, but it's also had a major knock-on effect that probably is less visible to us all in the supply chains and the food producers which sell their products, whether it's Findus or others. Those companies are really hurting because of this issue of supply chain and actually the surety of supply chains. So the question is, and the other one I'll just refer to, obviously, is that example that we all saw on the news of the factory that collapsed in the clothing sector. There have been 4 other collapses in the last 3 months, not all in the same country. We all heard about Primark and a couple of others in relation to that one, but more than 10 of our major high street retailers are now highly implicated in all of those. Not necessarily because they were directly making products in those factories. Some of them were literally doing the buttons and the zips in those factories. It wasn't even their clothing. But they are all now challenged by that. Some have lost some custom. That will probably come back. People have short-term memories. It will probably come back. But actually, again, it's knocked the investor confidence. The governments in those countries are saying, Western companies, are you exploiting our cheap labour, our poor infrastructure? Are you contributing enough? There is a full expectation. Local taxes on business from outside country will increase dramatically as a result, even if they also want to do something voluntarily. The knock-on impact, the domino effect that's going through that sector. And I sat with a major retailer in the fashion industry on Friday and talking exactly about this and the whole question of what is it appropriate to spend money to do to protect our license to operate, who else should be doing it on our behalf, How much should we do? When should we walk away from certain suppliers, etc.? All because, not because anything wrong with their retail outlets here or their internet distribution networks, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. This is entirely how much is it going to cost to give people that certainty back through our supply chain. And that is a massive new cost to the business. And the third one, a bit dangerous talking about this in this building. I realised that afterwards. But in terms of financial services, I don't think any of us in this country anyway would dispute that their license to operate is being severely challenged by what we've all experienced as customers, as publics, in terms of what has happened to our investments. The license to operate, the challenge on the leadership of those businesses as to whether they really made sound decisions is clearly something that's playing out every single day in our homes. Interestingly, I asked a question of this of a full global group for the mining sector about a month ago. And the loss of the trust and the license to operate in financial services was fairly exclusively restricted to the US and Western Europe. The support around the rest of the world was, we've got complete trust in them, they've got full license to operate. So you sit there going, well, maybe that's not surprising. But just think then of the impact, the extra threat to our financial institutions here, as those major banks in China and Asia have the full support of their general publics. They've got huge growing economies. So our banks are facing a significant additional competitive threat because they have lost their license to operate, but their peers around the world have not. So an interesting dynamic there within the supply chain. And I put up there about hindsight, and I just mentioned this because license to operate is something that you earn today. And we make today's decisions based on today's knowledge and best plans. But actually we're judged by what happens tomorrow. And I think in your industry, as in most, we have to be anticipating tomorrow because it's the lens of hindsight against which our license to operate is usually judged, not the lens of today. Because today, everything's quite acceptable. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sat here operating at all. We'd be shut down by now. So those are just some examples, I hope, to just provoke your thinking, not to give answers, but to demonstrate the sheer challenge of that license to operate is now under threat of, and just the diversity of the challenges, the depth, the breadth of what companies are having to manage as risks to their license to operate. But it's not easy, and I think Kerry alluded to some of these challenges in that particular sector. Unfortunately, our regulators, our opinion formers, and everyone else don't operate as a nice organised band of people who all largely agree and have got good consensus. They actually quite like to disagree. There's a lot of one-upmanship going on. So look at just the sheer tax arrangements that are going on, the sheer number of initiatives that are coming out, the discussions that are going on around European tax, UK tax, global taxes. It's immense. So actually, it's difficult for organisations to understand, well, what do we respond to and when and how, what's going on, which is most important. The pressures for contribution, whether it's through tax, whether it's through community payments, all of those often lack a clear financial basis, which is the fundamental foundation that companies in this room, our organisation, everyone is built upon. There is a financial foundation that is the basis of our decision making. And that's not something to be ashamed of, but it's something that you have to protect. If you don't have that foundation, you won't be operating anyway, and the license to operate will be a somewhat cosmetic discussion. Newsworthiness of failures is a key point for us, and it comes back exactly to some of the points that Kerry is making, and I suspect that Tricia will make. We all hear about failures, we rarely hear about successes. Building your license to operate, you have to talk about successes, and you have to create a newsworthiness around successes, whether that's employment, apprenticeships, innovation, whatever it is. You have to create that newsworthiness. But that's not easy, because we all incline towards the bad news story. Who reads the good news story when you can reel some gory stuff about some soap star or something on the front page? There's a new unprecedented scale of global duty. And this is, you might say, well, this isn't perhaps isn't us. We're maybe not for all global organisations. There are others in our sector who are. That's their issue. We're all part, I hope, as you've seen, of a global network. We are not immune from association with our supply partners. If anyone in the oil industry is threatened, it affects all of you. Perhaps not in the front line, but it affects all of you indirectly. And the mass information communication from voices that are more trusted. This is a real challenge because actually, although organisations often have the best information, the best knowledge in the most rational way, our voices often are not the most trusted. The corporate brand has lost a lot of its inherent trust, and we all have to work to regain it. And those voices of opinion formers and NGOs are very persuasive, even if they are based on limited fact. So it's very difficult, and no one underestimates the challenge. And all of you sitting in this room thinking, this is great, but actually, what do I go back to do today in my own business? What do I do tomorrow in my own business? I just wanted to put those up to reflect that it is hard. There's a comment there on the left-hand side about many companies are defensive. I think many of us feel beaten up, battered, constantly trying to say, we didn't get that wrong, it just happened that way, we did the right thing, whatever it is. They are defensive. What we need to move towards is organisations, industry groups like yours, which are actually very much on the front foot and for the future. We should be proud of what we're achieving, proud of what we're contributing to the economy, indeed learning from our mistakes, and indeed evolving towards the future. That is what will retain our licence to operate. And these 5 points here are just a synthesis of what we see with our clients that I wanted to leave with you in terms of really taking this agenda into your own organisations and into the industry group as a whole. Leadership from the top is essential. If your top leaders in your business are not thinking about the totality of your licence to operate, are not using that as a point of focus, then you will forever be struggling with dealing with some of the individual dots rather than really joining them, and you will not achieve the full degree of success that you need to protect and grow your licence to operate. Hugely important. It's from the board, the chief executive, the senior team. It is a new outcome that organisations have to focus on and then drill down into its parts. The sum of the parts is much greater than each one individually. Outward focus, and this comes to a point I think that Kerry made very ably in terms of talking amongst those you know. This is about actually who is outside the tent. What are their interests? What are their needs? And outward focus rather than inward focus. We're all in our comfort zone when we talk amongst ourselves. It's all a very comfortable little chat. But this is really getting those insights and using them. Effective relationships, and I would really ask all of you to look at your own organisations and say, do you have relationships with the relevant and right people? Again, as Kerry mentioned, but actually, are they effective? What do you want from those relationships? And what do those relationships want from you? And thinking again about that totality of networks. Decision making. One of the hardest ones in my view, because this is about making decisions for now, but also for the future. You might say we're already doing all of that, but it's making decisions consistent and substantive in their content, that they actually reflect all of the interests of those networks. And I think there's many times our decisions are too slow and other people make them for us. The white space that Kerry mentioned gets filled up by others. You have to fill that right space with quick decisions and learn from them if they're wrong. And finally, courage and confidence. At the end of the day, you have got a licence to operate. You are the best organisations to be there. We, along with our peers in our industry, are the best there. We work very hard every day to deliver value, jobs, creation, etc. We must be confident about that and have the courage to go out there and say, these are our plans, this is our position, and we'll defend that. so that others will come round. I did an AGM last week, which I'll just share with you, and I prepped the non-exec team around questions from protesters, etc., at that AGM. And I was probably as nervous as they were, if I'm honest. And the NGOs were all there, and they duly stood up, just like I expected them to. And they threw out some questions. The questions were answered with the business explaining its rationale for its approach. And finally, saying to the NGOs, also, come out and see us. Come and see our plans and why they're what they are and how we've got there. And the NGOs commented back, that's not the way we work. And we have no further questions. Now that for me was huge success from an organisation being prepared to say, these are our plans, this is why they're what they are. We might have chosen not to do certain things, but this is why they're what they are. We are a business, and we have to achieve any benefit, we have to continue running as a business. And we have to make those decisions. So that's where I wanted to leave you, just with those thoughts and some practical thoughts, I hope, hard to convey in a short time, but some practical thoughts about what we're trying to do here to protect your license to operate. And again, just to summarise, therefore, there's a commercial imperative. It's hurting businesses if they lose it. It's a lot more cost efficient to protect license to operate when you're in a strong position as you are today as an industry. You can't be passive. I really do encourage you to get behind what the industry is doing and indeed take your own actions. Look inside your organisation. It's not just communications. And look for some short-term wins, but recognise that this is quite a transformational change. And we believe this is the way the industry will be working going forward as those networks get stronger and stronger across the globe. So thank you for your time. I hope I haven't overrun too much. And thank you.